Hello again. Now I'm going to record this video to discuss the second component or board of this route, communicative language teaching. You were asked to work on it during the holidays. I hope you had the time to do it. And if not, well, try to use this time we are not meeting for catching up, okay? Remember that I'm going to activate this icon so you can have access through this icon to this component, to what is replacing the face-to-face component, okay? So let me start with the key points of this component of the route. You should know by now that we are discussing one more time, once again, the notions of view of language in connection with what we do in the classroom. See? You see here how our view of language determines what we do in the classroom. Another important point in this section is the key features of the famous approach to language teaching known as communicative language teaching approach. I'm sure you have a lot of information about it at this point because I can imagine you talked about it with Nancy in Práctica 2. So you have some notions. That's why there was a kind of game you were expected to play to activate these ideas and these notions. So a key concept introduced in the bibliography and the text you were expected to read is the notion of communicative competence, as discussed by Canale and Swain in one of the articles and as introduced by Richards in the video. And another very important concept or notion you're expected to identify in this block is the notion of discourse by Widdowson. Well, let's move on through these components. Let's begin with the activity, the practical component you were expected to carry out. You had to work with 2 transcripts, right? This one about the beginning of a lesson. Let's remember that a transcript is a dialogue or the writing of a dialogue that takes place between the students and the teacher at a particular moment of a lesson. So this is the beginning of a storytelling, and we can see the dialogue going on between students and teachers. Let's read some lines. What do you see in this picture, Susie? I see an elephant and a monkey. Susie can see an elephant and a monkey. Marcus, what can you see? I see a snake. Good, a snake. And what is the snake doing? Climbing a tree. The snake is climbing a tree. Say that again. The snake is climbing a tree. Good, the snake is climbing a tree. Yes. Matty, a zebra. A zebra, what color is a zebra? Stripes. And so on. Sorry, well, yes, the student says stripes, and the teacher offers this reformulated version of the answer. Stripes, the zebra has stripes? Yes. What color are the stripes? And that's how she goes on with this lesson. And then we have another lesson or another transcript, say, where a teacher, using the same material as in the previous transcript, performs or delivers the lesson in a slightly different way, as you probably noticed. Well, we have a teacher that says, this is a book, or this book is about lots of different kinds of animals you might see in the jungle. Does anyone know the name of an animal that lives in the jungle? Notice the beginning of these transcripts, right? An elephant. Right, you might see an elephant in the jungle. What else? A monkey. And then she works with the answers the students give. What do monkeys eat? Bananas, right. Sometimes monkeys eat bananas. Look at this picture. And she shows the class the pictures. Is the monkey eating a banana? No, he's not eating a banana. What is the monkey doing on the elephant? And the student touches his head in order to show more meaning. And the teacher says, right, the monkey is sitting on the elephant's head. That's funny. Have you ever seen a monkey sitting on an elephant's head before? Notice the nature of the questions in this transcript. This is what you were expected to analyze in the first part. the language in the interaction, the kind of language that is exchanged, and then the pedagogical aims. We clearly see two ways of approaching a lesson with the same material. First of all, in the first lesson, we are using a storybook or the pictures. The teacher is using a storybook or the pictures in the storybook to activate language, to recycle vocabulary, to recycle perhaps some structures that were taught before or that the teacher wants to revise. And the teacher also asks questions of the sort, she corrects the answers so that the answers are accurately produced, you see. The teacher is also very much interested in getting the students to speak, but the kind of speaking is descriptive of a picture. There is no connection, at least the questions do not foster any kind of connection between the student, the picture, and the student's world. And we have a very different story, a very different situation in transcript 2. Why? Because the teacher is assuming the role of a person who tells a story, and she's facilitating comprehension by doing things that all storytellers, even non-experts, do when they read a story to a child. They try to get the child involved in the story. They help the child anticipate the story through questions that make connections between the picture and the student's world. And the picture is also used to anticipate something that's going on in the story. This question about why is the monkey sitting on the elephant's head, and what's the egg doing there? So she's somehow waking up curiosity in the students, and she's also preparing the students for the reading of a story. Same material in transcript 1 and transcript 2, but we see different decisions made to deliver the lesson, and that those decisions reflect the view of language that we have been discussing so far. In transcript 1, the teacher is very, very much concerned with linguistic component. She's using a lovely story just to check knowledge of vocabulary, knowledge of certain structures, oral production without mistakes. There isn't a lot of focus on meaning because the sentences are purely descriptive. They do not produce negotiations of meaning except for negotiations of form. The teacher is concerned with getting the answers right. That's a structural view of language. While the teacher in transcript 2, as I said before, she is performing a real role in life, the role of a storyteller. She's not so worried about students' mistakes. She wants students to get hooked by the story and also get ready to understand the expected conflict in the story. Most stories have a conflict, probably this one too. So we have a language view in one transcript, the structural, and another one in transcript number 2, interactional. The consequences of a structural view of language in the classroom show repetition, focus on language, interesting, accurate responses. Questions are probably tuned with the structure that the teacher wants to practice, and we are moving on to pedagogical aims here. So, and then in the second case, the transcript 2, the focus is on meaning, and the pedagogical aim is that students enjoy and understand the story, participate in the dialogue with the teacher discussing the story. So, we see that the same material can produce two very different lessons. One exemplifies a more traditional approach or methods previous to communicative language teaching. The other one, transcript number 2, is much closer to what we should do in the classroom, especially when we work with material like this, a story. In real life, what are stories for? They are to be read and told. And that's what the role the teacher is assuming in transcript number 2. Regarding pedagogical aims, well, clearly in transcript number 1, we have a teacher concerned with the learning of the language, and that's it. The structures and vocabulary, and then the conception of language is structural, as I said before, and she focuses on that. Okay, I hope this is clear. I hope you noticed this the first time you thought about these questions. Remember that if you have doubts about this particular activity, you can always write below this, or perhaps I will open up, yes, I will open up a Padlet for doubts. Otherwise, the thread is going to be too long if you have a lot of questions. Well, let's move on. Another thing you were expected to do was read a text. I'm talking about this text as part of the lesson route, What is Communicative Language Teaching? And this is an interesting text because in a very short and simple way, you learn key aspects about the approach. But how is this component of the route related to what precedes? Well, the very beginning of the article focuses on language view. This is what we are discussing so far, right? And we have a definition by Firth who states that language is interaction. This is a definition of language. He also says that it is an interpersonal activity and it has clear connection with social context. This view of language then corresponds with the interactional view. Okay? So, from a communicative language teaching stance, this is the view of language teachers should hold. And this is the view of language that should be reflected in the lessons. I insist a lot on this because what usually happens is that you think you adhere to this approach, but your lesson plans do not show it. They show a more traditional understanding of learning with activities that do not respond to this view. So pay attention to this, please. In this text, you can find very interesting guidelines for planning, because since the approach is described, you have hints of what to do and what not to do in the classroom. For example, the text talks about real-life simulations. This is what we should try to build in classrooms, you see, imitate situations that reflect real life, but also situations that are meaningful to our students, because if you're working with a 4th grader and you bring a simulation on what to do at the airport if you're traveling, well, this is real-life simulation, but it's very far from the students' lives. So, 2 things that need to be considered here. That you are representing or simulating a situation in life, and this situation in life should be close to what children of a particular age, your students, live or go through at that age. They should also be meaningful topics, talking about perhaps the life or festivals in China, unless there is a particular situation in the city where you work, because there is a festivity and it's Chinese festivity. This topic won't be interesting to the students. They won't be close to their world. If you still insist on its validity, you want to teach China festivals, try to take your students through a road that makes this topic more vivid and meaningful to them. Otherwise, it's something too far. You won't really hook them with topics that are not meaningful to them. Another tip offered by this text is teachers look at the real language in life and replicate its use. You see, we can go back to the example of the transcripts. The teacher of the second transcript understood the situation, the social context of use of language, because she knew she was going to read a storybook. So she used the storybook in a situation that simulates real life. She read a story to the children, and she did exactly the same thing she would have done if she were to read it in Spanish. So language is always presented in context, and by context we mean two things. Linguistic context, there's always something that precedes a statement and something that follows. This kind of connection is anticipated and looked at by the teacher, and the social context. And by this we mean it happens at a particular moment in a particular situation, and there are particular people involved in the use of language that you take to the classroom. All of these elements need to be considered and need to be worked out in the lessons. For example, let's take a look at two activities. One of them is described in the text. I think it's called eavesdropping. And this is an image representing the concept, right? There's a description of this activity, and I want you to compare it with this exercise. I won't call it an activity nor a task, which was recently chosen by a student doing her practicas. What do you think? What is more communicative? Eavesdropping or Emma's daily life routine with a text about Emma, an invented character, with blanks to fill in? Which one represents a situation in life? Do we fill in the blanks of texts in real life? Do we go from here to there doing things like this in our daily life? How often do we do it? Why do we do it? We don't do it really. Emma's daily routine is an exercise which represents a structural view of language, where the only concern is to expose students to repetitive language, a language feature, simple present, and rehearses, practices, groups of words, actions, routines. Now, am I saying that Emma's daily routine is something that should be forbidden? No. If you believe this is one possible way of learning, go ahead and do it. But do not include it as a component of your lesson, because there is no interaction needed for this. You can leave this as homework if you believe in it. I particularly don't, but if you believe in it, you can do this as homework. You set it as homework, and your children don't need to interact with you to do this. So it's okay for out of the class activities. It does not, as I said before, it does not show real life simulations. It does not bring a meaningful topic to the student, because this is a girl, an invented girl, whose routine is probably quite far from what our children do in their daily lives. So none of these items is respected. Language is not really contextualized, except for the presence of a very artificial paragraph. It's a paragraph, and it's not a real genre. This is not a letter, this is not an email, this is not a comment on a Facebook page or on Twitter or whatever it is that children write nowadays. It's a paragraph, has nothing to do with real life. While eavesdropping describes a situation where students are overhearing a conversation, and they have to make lots of inferences from what they hear. They don't only have to reproduce what they hear, the content of that conversation, they also have to make inferences of the sort of how all the characters, the participants are, based on the tone of the voice, Also based on the topics they identify, they are discussing, where they are considering the background noise, for example. So many other things that really reflect what we really do in life. We may be overhearing a conversation if we are sitting in a bar, for example, and we may be hooked by this conversation and pay attention to what they are discussing, making lots of inferences from the little we can hear, overhear. Okay? So please, this is what we should do in communicative language teaching. This is what we should avoid, at least as an activity for the class. Okay? More elements about the text we are discussing. This short text also deals with the role of the teacher. It's presented basically as a guide and a supporter of the learning process, a person who organizes how the learning and teaching will take place. But this person is not necessarily the center of the lesson. Something I would like to add here is that when we are talking about very young learners, the teacher is the center of the lesson because he's the axis around which everything happens. He moves the lesson forward. This changes as students grow, as they become more independent and more familiar with the kind of activities they do in the classroom. Interactions shift between teachers and students towards students among themselves, pair work, group work, etc. So, teacher's role changes as students grow up. But what we can say is that in all cases the teacher fosters production in students, or at least participation, you see? So they become the center of the class, the lesson they produce, either in L1 or L2, they do things, they are not a passive receptor, as they used to be in previous methodologies. Well, then at the end of the article, don't miss this, it's like a list of things. The author of this article mentions authors who contributed to the building of the approach. There are two authors mentioned that I want you to pay attention to because we are going to expand on them as we move on. One of them is Canale and Swain. These are two authors, and they talk about the concept of communicative competence. This is a concept we are going to come back to. I think in this article, the author discusses the 4 dimensions of communicative competence. Why is this concept very important? Because in communicative language teaching, we define what we expect our students to learn. Before communicative language teaching, the only concern was with grammar and language. With the advent of communicative language teaching and this introduction of a new concept of communicative competence, 3 more dimensions were added. Grammar is important, but the other dimensions like the social component of language, which we call the sociolinguistic competence, was important. Understanding how language works in a particular context, in a particular place with particular people. Also, discourse competence. That means how language works at the level of a text, because before, in previous methodologies, the unit of analysis was just a sentence. Now we are not talking about sentences. Sentences are not discourse. We do not find sentences in real life. We find discourse. This is language alive, language situated in a particular context, produced by a particular person for a particular purpose, and these are all elements that need to be treated in the classroom. They need to be addressed. They cannot be overlooked. This is what we refer to as sociolinguistic competence. Discourse competence has to do with what happens with the information inside a text, not a sentence, how the ideas are related, how they are connected, what kind of devices are used to avoid repetition, to refer, etc. These are all things that are also developed and should be taught, and they should be content to be learned in language teaching. And finally, a 4th dimension known as strategic competence. Strategic competence is the kind of competence students need to develop to compensate for the language they don't know. For example, in one of the transcripts, you could see children using gestures to add meaning to what they were saying. Well, using gestures is a strategic competence, but there are many more, like, for example, concept. Okay, sorry, I thought there was a spelling mistake here. I was thinking of other strategies could be learning how to ask for a word. You see, when we teach our students, how do you say chunk, you're teaching them a strategic competence, a strategy to continue with their conversations even when they don't know the language. Okay? And finally, please don't miss the reference to Widdowson's discourse-based approach. It is related to what we are discussing. Widdowson speaks of language as language that is alive, as I said before, in a particular context, and he defines discourse and text in discourse. Text that is produced by someone in particular with characteristics that are defined by this person in a particular situation with a particular purpose. So this is a key concept in language teaching because we are going to plan lessons around discourse, around text, not sentences. Okay? Well, there's a classroom forum, or a classroom forum is going to be opened to discuss the task you were expected to do here. Okay, so I'm going to open a classroom forum for you to offer your examples, the copies that you selected and that reflect the guidelines introduced in this text. Of course, you're going to find more examples in transcript number 2 than in transcript 1. Okay? You can find examples of what not to do in transcript 1. So work on the forum, try to participate so that if I see problems or misconceptions, I can also interact with you. Then you had this video with Richards. This is a very famous author, very interesting, very popular. He wrote so many books, many interesting books, easy books to read. As a matter of fact, you will have one. And he introduces in these 10 minutes, he also summarizes what communicative language teaching is. So the idea I recommend you is to participate in this Padlet. If you click here, this is going to connect with a Padlet. Leave your doubts especially. Let's use this Padlet for doubts about communicative language teaching and what has been covered so far in the route, okay? The question here is, what did you learn from this video? What struck you as interesting? And, you can leave contributions in another forum I'm going to open for the discussion of these two questions, and you can leave your doubts in Padlet, okay? So there's going to be left for you 3 activities, I think. Classroom forum for discussing these elements, this task goes in classroom forum, your participation. This is taken from the root, okay? I hope you remember it. And here you have 2 more. A forum with ideas about what you learned from the video and what contributions can you make from the video, what struck you as interesting, okay? And the third task is to leave your doubts, questions, I don't know, things you're not sure about, things you would like to expand on, etc. in Padlet. 3 activities so far, okay? Let's move on. Finally, last but not least, there was this reading assignment, chapter 1 from, and this is the text I'm referring to, from Richards. Remember, we were discussing the author in the video. This is a book written by him. So we have chapters, I think I told you to read chapter 1 and chapter 2. Okay? Let me just check this. Chapter 1 and chapter 2, yes. What are the key points in chapter 1? Well, he discusses the concept of communicative competence. Please don't miss it. This could be a question in a test, okay? And then there is a list of features of communicative classrooms that could be very useful for you, especially next year when you can. You don't want to miss them. And in chapter 2, there is like a history of the methods before CLT, how CLT evolved since its beginnings from 1970 to now. CLT is a very, very different thing today. Basically, CLT was initiated as an approach, as a set of beliefs about language teaching and language learning. There were theories coming from the field of psychology and the field of linguistics and sociolinguistics that were put together to systematize a theoretical background. But the methodological development came later, as the teachers were trying to imagine a classroom respecting all these beliefs and theories. As Richard says in his video, today we don't have a recipe for teaching, we don't adhere to one unique method, but we do have a number of principles and guiding ideas that let us know if we are respecting these principles or not. This connects, for example, with Ellis's article in unit number 1. It's a collection of principles that do exactly this. They synthesize theory and findings and give you guidelines to what good teaching is. There's also a component in the end of the article of chapter 2, about methodological implications, which is always very important to look at. It's the application of the theory. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh yes, that's all. Well, I hope this was useful for you. We have covered the content of the unit devoted to board number 2. So, with this video, I have finished compensating, making up for my absence at the teacher training college of face-to-face lesson 1, okay? Because if I recall correctly, we were supposed to meet on the first Monday after the holidays, and I was going to give you feedback on these 2 components. This is what I have done in these 2 videos. So please work on board number 3. I'm going to activate it so that you can walk through the route, and then next time, if I'm okay, we will meet at the teacher training college. If not, I'll do exactly the same as I did today. Record a video and open up forums or activities for you, ways to communicate with me in classroom. Thank you for listening, so I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.